So what we need to do now is to move back into the market economy and start looking at market structures. Market structures are simply ways that a market can be set up. And in order to understand how markets are set up, we have to look at their characteristics. Now, the first market structure that we're going to look at is perfect competition. In order for a firm to be considered perfectly competitive, it has to have the following 6 characteristics. The first is that there are many producers. So many producers that no individual firm by itself has any market power. It can't change the price no matter what it does to its supply. It cannot change what's going on in the market. Secondly, there are many consumers. Again, so many consumers in the market that no individual consumer by his or herself can affect the market. For example, if you go to the store to buy, a loaf of bread, you don't like the price of the loaf of the bread, you think it's too high, you walk out without buying the bread, nobody's going to know because there's so many other people who are willing to buy it. This third characteristic is that there's perfect information. By perfect information, we mean that everyone in the market knows everything about the product. Producers know everything, all the different ways there are to make the product. No individual firm has any specific knowledge or power. This makes sure that we produce at the lowest price. Also, it means that all consumers have all of the information about the product. This helps make sure that you as a consumer, when you buy your product, you're being able to maximize your utility. Right? You make the best choices, that you possibly can. The fourth characteristic is that we have freedom of entry and exit of the market. By freedom of entry and exit, we mean that if you want to buy a product, you're capable of coming in to buy the product. You want to stop buying it, nothing's stopping you from walking away. Same thing with producers. If you want to start making a product, there are no barriers to keep you out. There aren't any patents or trademarks or any of that stuff. You are free to come in and start producing the good. If you want to get out of the market, you're free to get out of the market as a producer. This characteristic has a very interesting result, which comes into play more in micro, but I want to mention it here. In the long run, economic profit will be 0. Let me repeat that. In the long run, economic profit will be 0. Now, this may sound odd, but what we mean is that you are making just what you need to stay in business. As an economist, I calculate the cost of production to include what I need to stay in business, what I need to make in order to stay in business. So by saying economic profit is 0, it doesn't mean you're not making any money. What it means is you're making just what you need to stay in business. Okay, so there is a difference between an accounting profit and an economic profit. This will come back to be an issue in micro. It's one of the ways we can determine whether what we're looking at is long run or short run. But we'll come back to that. The fifth characteristic is homogeneous goods. By homogeneous goods, we mean that the goods produced by different producers are identical, or whatever differences there are in them is so minute that for consumers, any difference doesn't matter. So when you go into the market to buy bottled water, if you look at all of the different brands of bottled water, how do you choose which one to purchase? Well, you buy the one that's cheapest. All of these characteristics together make sure that under perfect competition, we produce the most output at the lowest price. That's what makes perfect competition the preferred market structure, is because it produces the most output at the lowest price. Now, one last characteristic of perfect competition is that there are no externalities in the market. An externality is defined as an unintended output of production for which the producer does not pay nor is compensated for. So the producer is making something that they don't pay the full cost of or they don't get the full benefit of. Now, again, this is something which comes into play more in micro, but it's very important that producers pay the full cost of production and receive the full benefit. Classic example of an externality is pollution. Producers make something they didn't intend, the pollution, and they don't pay the cost of cleaning it up because you and I have to breathe in the air or have to deal with the dirty water or whatever. All right. So if the producer doesn't clean up, that pollution is an externality. Now, if perfect competition is one end of the market structure spectrum, at the other end is monopoly. Now, when we look at monopoly, we look to see how does it differ from perfect competition. And in the case of monopoly, it differs in two characteristics. The first is that we only have one producer. So obviously that one producer has a lot of power in the market. The second reason second condition as to how monopoly is different than perfect competition is that we have barriers to entry and exit. There's something keeping other firms from entering the market. There's something keeping this firm in the market. And I've listed here some of the most usual characteristics of or barriers to entry and exit. A natural monopoly is one in which, as you get bigger, the market, the cost of production, the average cost of production drops so that the market actually pushes you to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Patents, government creation of the monopoly, the monopolist having, a firm having control over certain inputs into production. All of these are ways in which monopolies could exist, the barriers that allow monopolies to exist. Now, if perfect competition is one end of the spectrum and monopoly is the other end of the spectrum, there are several different market structures which fit in between. And I just want to look at two of them. The next market structure is oligopoly. Now, on the spectrum, it tends to fall closer towards monopoly than perfect competition. Oligopoly differs from perfect competition in two characteristics. The first is that there are a limited number of producers in the market. Now, this is difficult because how many is a limited number? Well, what we mean is that there are a limited number of major players in the market. There may be, hundreds or thousands of smaller players who don't have any power. But the main players, there's a limited number of main players who kind of control the market. The airline industry is a classic example of an oligopoly. The auto industry is an oligopoly. And finally, the last characteristic of oligopoly is that there are barriers to entry and exit. In the case of oligopoly, that barrier tends to be startup costs. If you wanted to start an airline, you could. You buy a plane, assuming you've got a pilot's license, you buy a plane, you can start shuttling people around. You could start an airline. Right? But are you going to be competing with that limited number of big players? No, because the cost of getting that big, buying all the planes, hiring all the people, getting the gate space at airports is far too expensive. All right. Now, the final market structure that I want to look at is monopolistic competition. This one on the spectrum of market structures is closer to perfect competition. Monopolistic competition, as you can see from the slide, only differs from perfect competition in one characteristic. It has heterogeneous goods. In the case of monopolistic competition, consumers now can tell the difference between a good produced by producer A and a good produced by producer B, and now that difference matters. All right, classic examples of monopolistically competitive industries, the soda industry. Are you a Coke person or a Pepsi person? The shampoo industry, at least I know most women find that shampoo is a heterogeneous good. You find one you like, you stick with it. Right? The tomato sauce industry tends to be, you've got your favorite brand. If you have brand loyalty to something, chances are it's monopolistically competitive. Now, think of the soda industry. You like Coke, you like Pepsi, whichever. The fact that you prefer one to the other now gives the monopolist a certain amount of, the firm a certain amount of power, because they know there's a certain number of customers who, no matter what they do to the price, will stick with them. If you're a Coke drinker, Coke can raise its price, you're not going to switch to Pepsi. Although there are alternatives, you choose not to. Of the non-competitive market structures, this is the only one in which the consumer gives the producer power. As long as I maintain my brand loyalty, this firm is going to have power in the market. Now, how many of you can tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi, and that difference doesn't matter? I happen to be one of those people. I don't care whether it's Coke or Pepsi. But, so for me, as an individual, the soda market is perfectly competitive. I buy the cheapest one. But there are enough people in the market who see soda as a heterogeneous good. They have a brand loyalty. They're Coke drinkers. They will only drink Coke. And if you have a brand loyalty, you then give the monopolist power. Now, do they have as much power as a pure monopolist? No. Because even no matter how much of a Coke drinker you are, if Coke were to raise the price to $5 a can, and Pepsi's selling for $1 a can, that price differential is too much. Plus, there are lots of other alternatives. You don't have to drink soda. You could go drink water. You could go drink coffee. You could go drink iced tea. You have lots of options. Okay? Alrighty. So our quick look at market structures. See you next week.